Good evening, all. I hope you're well. I, Gautam Maji, Assistant Professor, as well as head of the Department of English at Sadan Chandra Mahavidyalaya, happy to announce that I'm back with session number 20. And it's an international session, and we are very fortunate to have a world famous academician with us. He is Dr. Ato Quayson from Stanford University, California, USA. You know about him, I know, but before introducing our honorable guest, I would like to play a short introductory video of our guest, and after that, I will welcome our great academician digitally on our platform. So let's watch the video first. We have just watched this short introductory video of this world-famous academician. Now I would like to welcome our honorable guest on the digital platform of Sadhan Chandra Mohavidyalaya. So, first of all, good morning to you.
Good morning, Gautam.
Good morning because at Sir's place in California right now 7:30 a.m.
Yes.
and here is 8 p.m. So thank you very much, sir, for giving your valuable time to us and accepting our invitation. And sir, if you would like to, before you commence your insightful lecture, if you have anything to say about the venture that we have been conducting for the benefit of the students, then we'd be very happy for that.
First of all, let me say that your introductory clip was very, very, very good. It was
Thank you very much, sir.
very stylish, well put together. It was beautiful. You should send me that clip. I loved it. I loved it.
Yes, yes. And it has been prepared by me, sir. It has been prepared by me.
I know, of course, I know you're a very enterprising young man, but it's very, very slick, very slick. I've never been introduced so beautifully and all the relevant information and so on. So it's very impressive what you've done. And of course, I'm delighted. Absolutely. It's my first audience with students in India. I've never done it before in more than 25 years of teaching. And I've received several invitations, but yours was the first. So you hold a special place for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Sir, without further delay, so if you would like to give me the permission, then could we begin the session now?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. So as all the participants who are watching right now, I could tell you that if you have any question, you could easily ask him. But all the questions I will take to him after this insightful lecture. So you just drop your comment in the comment box or your question, whatever you have, and whatever if it is silly also, then you could ask, because Sir would love to take even the silly questions also. Because last time I had an interview with him and he said that whatever the silly question, let them ask. Okay, so you could ask any question regarding even literature, also post-colonial, anything else that you could ask, and I would take all the questions after his lecture. So if you have, don't hesitate, do drop questions in the comment box. So without further delay, sir, I would like to over to this session to you. Thank you very much, sir.
Welcome. Hello all. First of all, I'm very honored. Seriously, I'm very honored to be addressing my first Indian audience in India. Even though, the COVID has made it difficult for us to travel, and I really wish that I was before you so I could interact with you personally. This is a very great opportunity for which I feel incredibly honored. I want to also say a big thank you to Gautam Maji, your professor, who is a very, very enterprising young man. I was telling him in another context that he has the kind of characteristics that spell success. He's very enterprising, he's very focused, he's very persistent, but he's also humble in the things that he does, and his drive and his curiosity are really impressive. Now, what I want to do today is that I want to spend maybe 40 minutes at the most talking about Arundhati Roy's novel, The God of Small Things. Now, my discussion here is a chapter in a book that is forthcoming. It's called Tragedy and Postcolonial Literature. And in this book in general, so I'm coming to tell you about the book, which is forthcoming from Cambridge University Press very soon. In this book, I trace the literary history of tragedy from the Greeks to the present day. So I talk about Aristotle's theory of tragedy. I talk about Sophocles and Euripides. I make general statements. I also derive some insights. I derive some insights from Shakespeare. But the objective is not merely to produce yet another history of tragedy. I mean, people have done it better than me, but to extract from this long history a number of key principles. The first is the nature of what I call historical disputatiousness. And what I mean by this is that, especially in the Greek tragedies, there are big disputes. So the dispute between, say, in Aeschylus' Agamemnon, or in Euripides' Medea. Often these disputes are between individual characters, obviously, but the individual characters that occupy completely different ethical positions. Antigone is actually the prototype of the dispute I'm talking about. However, the disputes also have a historical character, in the sense that what the characters are disputing are really aspects of a larger historical transition. So the reason why there's a dispute is because the characters occupy different locations on the wider historical transition. And as I said, Antigone is the prototype of these disputes. So this is what I derive from the Greeks. From Shakespeare, I take something slightly different from Shakespeare, which is that Shakespeare also has disputatiousness, especially when you think of his history plays are very disputatious, but also some of the tragedies like Coriolanus, it's purely disputatious in the sense that people are quarreling, they are very loud and so on. But Shakespeare adds something that the Greeks do not have, which is that he connects this historical disputatiousness to states of unruly internal economies. That is to say, the characters are emotionally very fraught. The prototype for Shakespeare is Hamlet. So Hamlet is a fraught character, but he is being required to make certain choices within the historical transition marked by the fact that his uncle has murdered his father. Now, these two principles, historical disputatiousness, lots of historical disputatiousness, and unruly moral economies, the state of the emotional character of the individual responding to what are major historical transitions, I then isolate as a core principle to think about post-colonial tragedy. Because in many post-colonial tragedies, what we are seeing is states of historical transition. So you think of Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, or Chinua Achebe's Arrow of God. And so the big historical transitions. But you also see a state of internal states of unrest, emotional, because the individual characters are having to respond to major historical transitions, which are under colonialism or in the course of independence or post-independence. And so there's a lot of unruliness in post-colonial texts, which are tied to states of emotional unrest. But there's another element that I derive from the history of tragedy, which is that tragedy is linked to suffering. And suffering relates not merely to catastrophe. So I've lost all my property or my house or my wife and so on and so forth. So suffering is not merely related to catastrophe, but it is connected, and this is my definition of suffering for this book, is the relation between, or let me backtrack, the sense of a threat to personal self-integration. So the things that make you suffer are the things that make you feel a loss of personal integration, that yourself is literally, almost dissolving. Now, there are many reasons for this loss of personal integration, which including poverty. For example, if you are extremely poor, you never feel yourself coherent. But also important in the loss of personal self-integration is the loss of family. I have a discussion via Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, where he says that for a man or a person to be happy, they need the comforts of philia. And philia stands for the obligations and comforts of family and friends. If you woke up one fine afternoon and your entire family and friends were dead, according to Aristotle, you not only would you suffer immensely, but you would lose the capacity to be good and to make rational, ethical choices. And so my definition of suffering is tied closely to the loss of integration, self-integration. And you will see how historical disputatiousness, what I said about the Greeks, internal states of emotional unrest, and a sense of self-disintegration are all pertinent to a discussion of Arundhati Roy's novel. So I've given you a brief account of the book in general, my forthcoming book from Cambridge University Press, and now I'm taking all these three central elements to illuminate via Arundhati Roy's novel. Now, as I'm sure you all are familiar with this novel, it won the Booker Prize, I think it was in 98 or so. It has had a lot of mileage all over the world. It's very beautifully crafted. It's a beautiful novel, but it tells the story in two time sequences. So there are two temporal frames. One is via events that occur in the Ipe household in a town called Ayemenem, and through the lives of twins, Rahel and Esther. And they're 7 years old in the first time frame. And the main thing that happens is that their cousin, who has come to visit from London for Christmas, dies a tragic death as they are crossing the Menechal River to go to the other side. The children, they want to go and do something across the river in a place called the History House. Now, this death coincides also with what we would call police brutality against Veluta, the lover of their mother. But it so happens also that Veluta is a lower caste. He's an untouchable. And so the love between their mother Amu and Veluta, it's considered badly. Things basically end badly for the 7-year-olds, the twins, and their mother. Their mother is sent into exile. The twins are split up. The second time frame is 23 years later, when they are 30. Now, the way the novel is told, there is an oscillation between the two time frames. So the narration of the events unfolds like something like a jigsaw puzzle. So different things are anticipated and also reversed. So they're anticipated and there's a reversal to revisit the past and so on. Let's not talk about the form of unfoldment. There's something else that I want to lay out, which I think is very important for understanding this novel. Now, one of the key principles, my guiding principles in reading any literature, it could be Indian literature or African literature or any literature at all, is that my reading is fundamentally comparative. So when I'm reading an African novel, I'm always trying to relate it and compare it to something else completely different, not necessarily African. So if you attended any of my classes in, say, African literature, you would hear about Shakespeare, you would hear about Sophocles, you would hear about Rushdie, you would hear about Saramago, you'd hear about all kinds of things, because I think comparatively at all times. Now, one of the comparative frameworks for Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things is the world of children's novels. So children and young adult novels, for the simple reason that the bulk of the novel is narrated from the perspective of the twins, young when they're children. And so I thought to myself, this is interesting because it is being narrated from the perspective of these twins. And even when they grow up at age 30, the texture of narration does not change. It still imitates the universe of childhood anyway. And so why don't we compare this novel to other children's novel and see the similarities and differences? Now, the two things about children's novels, when I say children, I mean both children and young adults, is that in children or young adults novels, the children are obliged to interact with the world of adults. So they're children doing their thing, but they always have an eye to the world of adults. However, the world of adults appears to children as full of enigmas. That is to say, children and young adults typically don't understand the world of adults. Adults, they love differently. They are always issuing commands. The principles by which the adult world structures itself is rarely comprehensible to children. Now, this relationship between the enigmas of the adult world and the world of childhood can manifest itself either as sympathetic to the world of childhood, that is to say, the enigmas are non-threatening. They are non-threatening to the self-integration of children. So the adult world is full of enigmas, but those enigmas don't generate threats of any kind. Or the enigmatic world of adults is actually full of menace. So it is enigmatic because the enigmas threaten the integration of the children. Now, the contrast between the two, that is to say, enigmatic adult worlds that are sympathetic to the world of childhood and threatening, you find it in children's literature everywhere. Let me just give you a couple of examples. In Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, famous, people have read it all over the world. In Tom Sawyer is like a 13-year-old boy, and he's really a trickster figure. You know, he manipulates and tricks his friends to paint the fence that his aunt has asked him to paint. He collects money from them. It's a world which is really funny and so on. And in that novel, the world of adults is a little bit distant. It's also full of enigmas, but it doesn't mean anything. Doesn't seem to be threatening, except for one important element, which is Injun Joe. Injun Joe is a Native American character in the novel, whom Tom Sawyer and his friend Huck Finn see murdering someone else at night. They are hiding, so they are not seen. And there's a quarrel, and the Injun Joe whacks Doc Rivers, I think he's called, and he kills him. And of course, this knowledge is really shocking to them. They run away, the two boys, and they swear an oath never to divulge this information. It's going to be their well-kept secret. Injun Joe is subsequently arrested on suspicion. He's tried in the town's court, but Tom Sawyer has been persuaded to go and testify against Injun Joe. And as the trial is ongoing, Injun Joe breaks away and jumps through the window and escapes. Injun Joe's escape represents the world of adult menace in the novel. In other words, in Tom Sawyer, everything seems to be going fine until Injun Joe escapes, and the kids, the two boys, now realize that there is a menace coming from this escapee adult. I don't want to talk about it too much, all the fascinating things that happen. But this element of menace then becomes a source of concern for the young boys, so that their world of mischief and play is now a little bit discolored because they are permanently aware of this menace. This is one example. Another example is in an African novel, actually, called We Need New Names by the Zimbabwean writer Violet Bulawayo. in No Violet Bulawayo, the setting is in a slum in Zimbabwe. And the world of the children is this is a group of kids. They're between 10 and 12, and they play a lot. But what these kids do, the narrator is called Darling. What Darling does as she's narrating the events of their childhood is that she doesn't shy away from naming some of the terrible things that occur in the adult world, the AIDS, political violence, and so on and so forth. And yet, what the children do at all times is to translate the world of adults into play. So they're always inventing games, games such as, for example, Find Bin Laden. So they've heard that Bin Laden is a terrorist on the news, and they convert themselves into place soldiers who are trying to find. So it's a hide and seek kind of game, and they call it Find Bin Laden. And by this Find Bin Laden, they're translating the world of news and of global terrorism into a universe of child's play. So throughout the novel, No Violet Bulawayo's We Need New Names, there's this constant translation of whatever it is, the enigmas of the adult world, they recode it into playtime. So they're always, as it were, deflating what are really the enigmas of the adult world and converting them into their own games. Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things is similar to these novels that I have just mentioned, because Rahel and Esther are always converting the adult world into playtime. The way they do it is by manipulating language. So the English language is a pliable tool in their hands. So they're always, breaking language into its phonemic components. So their uncle, Chaco, tells their mother, who is his sister, that as a woman, she has no locus standi, which is legal for you have no standing to determine anything legally. The kids hear it as locusts, the insects. Locusts stand I. So that's how they hear it. And that is how they keep referring to it. Oh, mom has no locusts stand I. This is just one example. Everything that they hear, they turn into play, but it's a play of language by manipulating the sound system of language and breaking language down into its component parts and reassembling them. Now, actually, this play with language, of which we get lots of examples. Another thing that they do is reading backwards. For example, they are set, some reading practices, and they are so good, adept at reading, that they can read things backward. And this is really annoying to their aunt, of whom more in a moment. And so they're always playing with language. However, these language games, which are on the surface similar to the games we find in No Violet Bulawayo's novel, which is to say, they are games that children exercise in order to convert the world of adults into playtime. One small difference with the God of Small Things is that the language of linguistic play does not reside exclusively in the minds or the consciousness of the children. This is really important. But it also colors the third person narrator. So the third person narrator, who is responsible for setting scenes, for giving us historical details, and so on, often and almost consistently, the third person narrator, whether that third person narrator is speaking on behalf of Rahel and Esther, or is narrating something historical or political, they also tincture their narration through language games. In other words, the third person narrator, their language or their discourse is a mirror image of the world, the world of children, of the two kids. But there's one problem with this third person narration and the proximity, as it were, the third person non-participant narrator and the world of children, their perspective, is that even when the children become adults, that is to say at age 30, now I mentioned the two time frames, there's the first one, and then when the novel also, they return at age 30. Even in the frame of age 30, the language games of the narrator, which I said has taken on the coloration of the universe of the children, remains the same. This raises a very significant problem, which is that it seems that the trauma that the children suffer because of the death of their cousin and the death of the Luther, the really terrible trauma, it, as it were, it traps them in the world of childhood, even when they are adults. So this is a crucial thing. That is to say, they never grew up in consciousness, so that their language games, which were, commonplace in childhood and completely appropriate, remains with them. And this is partly the source of my title, that it is an arrested Bildungsroman. The arrested Bildungsroman is shown in the fact that the language games of the children never abate. It remains the same. However, going back to the enigmas of the adult world and its impact on the world of childhood, there are a couple of elements, even when the children are young, which shows that unlike, say, Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, and Novalet Bulawayo's novel, the enigmatic adult world imposes what I will describe as an ambient menace, sources of menace, ambient. By ambient, I mean they're surrounded with menace at all sides, on all sides. And there are two sources of this ambient menace. The first source of menace is that the universe or the social world of the novel is inherently patriarchal. And so their mother, who has taken her children away from her alcoholic husband, is considered a social pariah because she's husbandless. And she's constantly reminded in the novel that because she's husbandless, she has no locusts stand eye. Now, this repeated, almost demonization of the unmarried woman also seeps into the children's world because they are also contaminated by the fact that they are fatherless. And they are reminded, at different points, their mother is husbandless and they themselves are fatherless. And in fact, their uncle, whom they are very fond of, Chaco, is the one who comes out with this phrase, "Locust standi." At some point, he tells his sister, "What you have is mine, and what I also have is mine." In other words, you have nothing. What is mine, and what is yours is mine. And it's because you are husbandless and you've come to stay back amongst in your family household. So patriarchy imposes a major source of ambient menace for the children because it undoes any form of independence for their mother, and they see it, and therefore it's a source of menace for them. The second source of menace from the adult world is from their great aunt, Baby Kochama. Now, Baby Kochama's story is also very fascinating. As a young woman, and we see this, there's reverse to way back. There's a special phrase for it. It's escaping my mind. But anyway, there's a narrative recollection of when she was a young girl. She falls in love with an Irish priest, a trainee Irish priest. They themselves, the household, are Syrian Catholics. So they're Syrian Catholics. And so they're supposed to be Catholic. But she, as a young girl, falls in love with this very dashing priest. And the love is not requited. He's called Father Mulligan. Father Mulligan, he likes her, but what's this young child jumping up and down and getting all crazy whenever she sees me? He ignores her. He treats her politely, but her unrequited love is internalized. Baby Kochama internalizes this unrequited love as a form of injury. So throughout her life, she feels wounded by the fact that the man never loved her. She never falls in love again. She never marries. And throughout her life, she has a diary. And every day of her life, from then until however old she is, every day she writes in the diary the same thing. I love you, Father Mulligan. Every day she opens the diary, she'll write some other things, but to close the entries, she writes that in. This also means that Baby Kochama is suffering what Freud would describe as melancholia or melancholy. The difference between mourning and melancholy is that to mourn is to, you suffer the loss, but you surrender the love object. So when you mourn, you don't hold on to the love object. You substitute another love object for the lost love object. Melancholia, on the contrary, is a refusal to surrender the love object, a refusal to substitute the lost love object with another love object. And Freud adds that it is a form of introjection. So for the melancholic, the one suffering melancholia, doesn't surrender the object, but introjects, swallows the form of the object, and that becomes a source of constant pain internally. Mourning is healthy, melancholia is obviously unhealthy. So we can see that Baby Kochama is melancholic because she never surrendered Father Mulligan, even though, in fact, Father Mulligan even converts to a Hinduism, which annoys her a lot. He writes letters to her every so often, and he tells her, now I've abandoned the Catholicism, I'm now a Hindu. And it irritates her that he didn't abandon Catholicism for her. That is to say, he doesn't abandon Catholicism because of love for her, Baby Kochama, but for another religion. In other words, she's twice, at a loss. Now, this internalized melancholia, this introjection of her loss, makes Baby Kochama extremely bitter. But the way she takes out her bitterness is that she's always casting around for people that she thinks are her social inferiors. And who are her social inferiors? In the same household, Amu and Rahel and Esther, because Amu is husbandless, and Esther and Rahel are fatherless. So she's always trying to foment some trouble for them, often fruitlessly. Try to make some trouble for them and so on. They mock her, the kids mock her all the time, except that on the occasion of the discovery of the relationship, the amorous love affair between Veluta and Amu, she gets her chance. And she is the one who goes to the police station to lie, to get the kids, to trap the kids into a complex set of circumstances. And so it makes the kids take responsibility for the death of their cousin. and also over Luther. In other words, what we have seen is that unlike the other young adult children's novels, the enigmatic world of adults in The God of Small Things generates a sense of constant ambient menace, which impedes or it interrupts their playtime at different levels, and at a certain point in the novel converts everything around them into tragedy. And the tragedy is specifically the fact that the very close unit, the two twins are very, very close. And they're also very close to their mother. After the terrible events of the finding out, the discovery of Luther and so on, the family, that close-knit unit is dismembered. Their mother is exiled to another town. She dies of consumption in a very, very bad way. And Esther is sent away to live with his father, whom he's never seen since the age of 2. He's 7 years old when he's sent away. And Rahel is sent off to a girls' boarding school. In other words, there is a direct evidence of the dismemberment of philia. You remember a while ago I said that according to Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, the worst suffering takes place on the absenting or the loss of philia. And so when the Rahel and Esther return to the novel, Rahel is full of chaos internally, while Esther is full of quiet, silence. So silence and chaos is the way in which they have internalized the major loss of the innocence of childhood. So one is extremely, Esther doesn't talk. He just goes on long strolls. He's completely oblivious to everyone, except that his sister has the uncanny capacity of not just reading his mind, but feeling whatever he's feeling. And so she reads his mind and feels his feelings. So quiet and chaos. And quiet and chaos become the twins, of unruly emotional states. Remember what I said about the tragedy, historical transition, major disputatiousness, unruly emotional states or unruly affective economies. So that quiet and chaos becomes their internalization of unruly emotions, states that they cannot express. Now, one of the things that is also happening in the novel is there's a series of historical transitions in the novel. They are not at the scale of, say, Aeschylus' Oresteia, which is about the Trojan War, or Philoctetes, Sophocles' Philoctetes, also Trojan War. It is not on that scale. But there's a small scale history that is taking place because it is the history of the evolution of communist politics in Kerala. The state in which the novel is set is the state of Kerala. In Kerala, as you well know more than I do, is a socialist, a communist state. And the novel miniaturizes this process of the political leftism of the state. And it miniaturizes it through a character. Is called the Pillai, Comrade Pillai, who is a very cynical person. He's a very cynical person. And he deploys politics as an instrument to satisfy his own ends and desires. Now, this instrumentalization of the political realm is also a way to show how the historical change that is taking place to consolidate unionized politics, for example. There's quite a bit of discussion about unionized politics, does not relate to the production of equity and justice. So there's that process of transition, historical transition. The other process of transition, again, it's not fully worked out, is the process of transition from a largely rural, idyllic economy, which is the town of Yemenem, to a tourist-driven economy. So we find also in the novel descriptions of how the history house is converted into a tourist resort and all the tensions that involves and so on. So there's that also. It's a process of historicization, which is written in miniature. The third dimension of historicization is that the novel is also trying to reflect on the determinants of what the novel calls the love laws. The love laws are the laws that determine who can love and whom to love, which is the laws that determine love between higher castes and untouchables. But the challenge of the love laws, or the critique, not the challenge of the love laws, it's a critique that never goes fully to the full extent, because of the authority and power of all the social actors that want to determine the success of the love laws. So what I'm saying here is that the novel also miniaturizes different historical processes. The process of the establishment of communist politics is one. The process of the evolution and, in fact, the intractability of the love laws is another, and then other miniaturized forms of the evolution of this district, this community, into a largely rural, idyllic community, into a tourist, very heavily saturated with international interest and so on. And it is against these histories, again miniaturized, that we find the evolution of the consciousness of these children against an adult world that they cannot fully understand. So I will stop there. I need to go to the bathroom. I'll be back. And then when I return, we can continue our discussion.
Okay. As you have been watching this very insightful lecture, I hope that you are enjoying it. If you have any question, you can drop your question in the comment box. I is coming back to take your questions. Okay. And then we will discuss about his upcoming book also, which is Tragedy and Post-Colonial Literature. So if you have anything else to say, you can drop your comment, drop your suggestion, anything else, you can just drop here. And I hope that you are enjoying this lecture. It's very insightful. And in this time, I would like to inform another thing that we're going to have the next session, the session number 21, that's going to come on 21st September. And on in that particular session, we're going to have another very special guest from Malaysia, from Nottingham University of Malaysia. And I hope that that session definitely will be enriching and intriguing as this one. And I'm also very happy that I have been getting your support. Without your support, without your cooperation, we rather cannot make it happen. So thank you very much, Hatun from the Mohabidalaya, the Department of English, is very happy to announce that all the sessions that we have been organizing, constantly helping all the students. So I'd like to inform that our sir is back. So I'm taking him on the screen, And then, so, okay, before I would like to know about your upcoming book also. But before knowing about this thing, I would like to take a few questions which I have got. And after this question answer session, then we'll know about your upcoming book, which is supposed to get published in 2021, which I have come to know. But from your last time conversation, I have come to know that this is coming in quite 2 months, 2 weeks. Okay,
Two,
in
no,
2 weeks.
not 2 weeks, 2 weeks, about 2 months. I actually wrote after our meeting on Wednesday, I wrote to my editor at Cambridge University Press and I said, look, my friends in India are hungry for this book. So tell me, he hasn't responded, but he's going to give me the exact date when I will have the physical copies. And when I find out, I will let you know.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, sir. So, could you take the questions?
Yes.
Okay, I'm taking the question on the screen. If you can't read it out on the screen, then I'm reading out for you. Okay,
Okay.
I'm taking the questions first. Uh, Let me choose the manner first. This is from Bidisha Chakraborty, and Bidisha asks the sir, then can you say these small things actually relate to big things in life like death, love, and fleeting upheaval, literally and metaphorically as well?
That's actually a very good question because the novel spells out quite clearly the domain of small things and the domain of big things. Now, the domain of small things is different from the domain of big things. The domain of small things is the domain of things felt but unstated, you know. So, envy, jealousy, fear, anxiety, these are all the domain of small things. The domain of big things are the domains of nature, nature, politics, the love laws, and so on. So the novel describes that is the domain of big things. However, the domain of things unstated, which is really emotional, ephemeral feelings, and so on, toward the end of the novel, at the moment of crisis, the novel calls it the terror. The terror is when Veluta is discovered in the relationship and all hell literally breaks loose. It is the domain of small things that gets magnified and connected to the domain of big things. What do we mean by this? It is Bibi Kochama's jealousy and melancholia, which no one knows. We know because the narrator has told us what she writes in her diary. That domain of envy, jealousy, anger, bitterness is what she uses to go and lie to the police authorities at the police station, and that gets the police to go and beat Veluta to death. So even though the domain of small things, emotions, ephemeral emotions and anxiety and so on, seem to be separate from the domain of big things, it is actually the small things that, as it were, fuel that fuel the escalation of the social forces that lead to the breakup of the family. In other words, the tragedy. At the same time, so I'm saying that the small things, the domain of small things, galvanizes or fuels the social chaos that leads to the breakup of the beautiful small family. But at the same time, the domain of big things is also shown to be a little bit incomprehensible. And what I mean is that during the terror unfolds. The terror is the social chaos in the social world. It unfolds under the, as it were, supervisory of authority of a very unusual monsoon storm. And the monsoon storm, which is raging and so on, it is the monsoon storm that leads to the death of their cousin. So somehow the world of big things, nature, politics, the love laws, seems to have some effect on the, as it were, unforeseen circumstances. I mean, when the kids are getting on the canoe to cross the river, the length is small, but because the rain is falling, the storms are lashing them. The river is swollen, so the boat capsizes, and their cousin does not swim to the shore. And so the world of big things seems to have, and this is actually a very good tragic, as it were, dimension, because from the Greek tragedies, we also know that there's often a relationship between determinism and free will. Oedipus Rex, he's predicted by the oracle that he will kill his father and sleep with his mother. He has nothing to do, he doesn't know, and he tries to escape it. And yet, because it's been determined, determinism is the world of the universe of big things. So that's how I would answer it.
Thank you very much, sir. We have a few more questions I'm taking on the screen. This is from Gargi Jana. Is time as destroyer the novel's most insistent theme?
Well, time is not a destroyer. Time is not a destroyer in that sense. But time is shown to be scrambled in the sense that even though the novel, of course, is temporally going forward, from A to Z, it also shows that you cannot understand what is moving ahead without getting a sense of what has gone before. But the relationship between what is moving ahead and what has gone before is the relation of a labyrinth or a puzzle. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. So the way the novel unfolds, past and present are not so easily demarcatable, because the novel will be narrating an event in the present, and it will just shoot forward to 23 years later. And when it shoots forward to 23 years later, it will then reflect upon something that happened 700 years before. And so time, first of all, the reason why time is not a destroyer in any straightforward sense is that it is not linear. It is not linear. Time unfolds like a series of puzzles. See? So it is not, there's no linearity to time. So there's the passage of time, but the way the novel narrates time is by chopping it up. So I wouldn't say that it is time that nature, yes, nature is a destroyer. That's quite, nature with a capital N is clearly a destroyer. Social relations, of course, they are also destroyers. But time is a little bit more complicated. It's almost that to understand time, you require patience a lot, because you require interpretative patience to understand how time is unfolding in the novel.
Okay. It's wonderfully you have explained, sir. So I'm taking another question. It's a big one. So I think your face is not found. So I'm reading it up for you, sir. Can you take a lesson from here about how it is really significant what the children and teens are internalizing? Obviously, it's enigmatic to them, and in the process of discovering the real world, they will come across some menace. So I would be really glad if you could give us any advice on how to avoid the trauma of melancholic, unhealthy pattern after coming across any such incident.
Okay. Yeah, this is a big question. Oh my God. So she's asking me,
Psychological question.
an interpreter of maladies, of children's maladies. Well, I can say something about it. The thing about children, and we've all been children before, is that they need to feel safe. They need to feel safe to make mistakes. So as a child, safety is really important. But what I mean by safety, you don't need to be rich to be safe. Even a poor kid can feel safe in their poor environment. But what is required is a consistent set of affirmations. That every child, whether they come from a wealthy background or a poor background, requires a healthy and consistent set of affirmations, because they are actually two different kinds of trauma. There's the big trauma of loss. So the kid is growing up, they lose their parents, or they suffer sexual abuse. So this is a major traumatic event, which is a major loss, and which sometimes cannot be avoided, and sometimes there's no justice. And so, but there's another kind of trauma, which is developmental trauma, which is at different stages of a child's evolution in life. They require the consistency of affirmation, but those affirmations are taken away from them so that they no longer feel safe in making the mistakes that they have to make as children. And this then lets them internalize uncertainty and fear. Now, when I say developmental trauma, it can take place at any time in a child's evolution. So the child asks lots of questions. Let me give you a very simple. Children love asking questions, and some of the questions seem, frankly, really well. How did this question get into the child's head? At any point in this incessant stream of questions, if the child is punished for curiosity, and I'm giving you the most simple example of developmental trauma. So children like asking questions. The child is always asking ridiculous questions. Why is the sky blue? I mean, when my daughter, my little, she's now an investment banker. When she was 5 years old, she asked me out of the blue, does God go to the loo? 5 years. Does he go to the loo? That's basically, does he poo? Does God poo? And I thought very quickly and I said, he's omnipotent. So of course he can poo. So I said to her, yes, God also poos. Then she said, all of a sudden, age 5, then he is not all powerful. That's what the child said. If God goes to the toilet and poos, then it means he's not all powerful. And that's it. We didn't talk about it. I was so stunned by this 5-year-old. Now, this question, so we talked about it, we chatted about it. I was still trying to process what immense, mind she had. If I had shut her down and said, don't talk about God that way, it's a form of blasphemy. What I would have been doing is that I would have been withdrawing the affirmation that a 5-year-old needs for her to feel that any question, it doesn't matter to, that's why I was telling Gautam the other day, there's nothing like a silly question. Silly questions do not exist. You understand? There's nothing like a silly question. For a child to avoid developmental trauma, they have to ask any question at any time and be affirmed for it. So, but this is just one example of developmental. It's not a big hit. And so, to answer the question then, is that children need to feel safe. But to feel safe means there has to be a consistent structure of affirmations of whatever they're doing. Next question.
Thank you, sir, for this wonderful answer. And yes, you told me earlier also all these silly things. Okay. Yes. And you have told me about my daughter also.
Yeah, there's nothing like silliness. Mm.
Okay, so I have two more questions I'll take because we have meeting, I know, sir. So, Devmita Chakraborty, thanks for several important insights into a well-loved novel. Would like to know how you read the ending in the context of your discussion of familial disruptions.
Okay. Now, I'm assuming that you mean the ending when Esther and his brother, his sister, make love. I'm assuming that that's the ending because the novel, we might say, has multiple endings. So I'm assuming that you mean that. The way I interpret that ending is that, and they spoon together, that section is well described. The first thing about that, as it were, social transgression. Now, their mother's relationship with Velutha is a social transgression. Their as it were, incest is also a social transgression, but there's a big difference between the two. The mother's love affair with the Luther is a public social transgression. Everybody knows about it. And this is what leads to the terror. The kids, Esther and Rahel's lovemaking is done in private. No one knows about it but us. Therefore, it is really not a social transgression. Only we know that. The rest of the household do not know that they've slept together. So the status of that transgression is withdrawn from the social world, so that the social world cannot pass the kind of judgment we know they would have passed if it had been public. As the first. And the second thing is that I interpret that scene as their attempt to return to their mother's womb. So I interpret it almost like a clamoring or a nostalgia for the amniotic fluid of their mother's womb. And so when they spoon together and they make love, it's a desperate sign of the interruption of the Bildungsroman. In fact, that for me is another sign that emotional, they may have grown up in body, physically, but they are still trapped in the universe of childhood. And actually, they are, in a sense, we might say there's a kind of melancholia going on there, that they desire a return to a place of safety. The only place of safety is their mother's womb. And that's why they spoon together. That's how I interpret that ending.
Okay, sir. Next one, we're going to read it out. I'm reading out for you, sir. Disha Day is asking, sir, it's very pleasant to hear you. So the juxtaposition of the adult and the child role in God of Small Things and some serious issues felt which kind of effect on the child or teenage readers aren't this if affect them psychologically and break their trusts?
Well, the novel, The God of Small Things, even though it features children, it is not a children's novel. I should have mentioned this earlier. No one would give this novel to a 13-year-old. They wouldn't understand it. So the theme is childhood and adulthood, but actually the novel is for adults. So it's adults who read The God of Small, adults like us, and understand it. You could give Tom Sawyer to, I read Tom Sawyer when I was like 9 years old. There's no way any 9-year-old would read The God of Small Things, or Huckleberry Finn, or Kim, Kipling's novel Kim. You could give it to a kid, a 12-year-old, 11-year-old, and they would read it and they'll make sense of it. You wouldn't give the God of Small Things to an 11-year-old. The point of this is that the novel is staging major tragic themes using the universe of childhood. So the universe of childhood allows it to, it's almost like a hook, it allows it to hook different Roy to hook different tragic thematics. But then the world of that novel is actually not a world that a child or a young adult would understand reading it. So that's how I would say. So, in answer to your question, a child, first of all, it would be irresponsible to let a child read such a novel, a young adult read. It is too compounded for them to understand. They would have to read it almost as if in translation, that is to say, in English, but the world of it will have to be translated for them or mediated by an adult voice. The adult voice being here a teacher. So it conceivably could be read by, say, 15-year-olds, but it has to be read in the context of a classroom where the teacher would break it down that these are some of the themes and so on and so on. The final thing is that we shouldn't worry too much about children being traumatized by what they read. Because the thing is, unless the child does not know the distinction between make-believe and fact. In fact, it is more terrifying for children to read the newspapers. All the nonsense that we see in the newspapers, bloodshed and deaths from COVID-19 and irresponsibility of the politicians. It's actually more traumatic to read the newspapers for a child than to read a novel.
Thank you very much, sir. So I'm taking the last question this session. This is from Gargi Jana. Next, second question from Gargi Jana. Is the class segregation system the root of barbarism and evil in the novel? And if so, what are the implications of this viciousness?
I don't want to use the words barbarism and evil. They're too strong. They're too strong. This is a novel. It's a novel. It's not a pamphlet, a political pamphlet. So I don't want to use strong words like barbarism and evil. What the caste system shows in the novel is a set of interdictions. So the caste system imposes certain interdictions on love relationships between touchables and untouchables. So that's it. And once those barriers are transgressed, there are immediate consequences. This is not barbarism. This is social relations. So what we have to read from the novel is that what kinds of interdictions do these imply? And what are the kinds of, as it were, punishments that emerge out of their infraction? It has nothing to do with barbarism. It's the social relations. And what we can then generalize from the novel for the outside world is what are the many interdictions that are placed on whom to love and how to love by families, by state bureaucracies, by society in general. So that is what is of concern. The reason I cannot use words like barbarism and evil is that you are prejudging before you analyze. You can't do that in literature. You cannot prejudge before you enter analysis. You have to analyze before you come to a form of, and it's not so much judgment. It's not an ethical standpoint kind of judgment. As long as you use terms like barbarism and evil, you've prejudged it before analyzing it. That's not a good way to go.
So, do we have time to take another more questions? That I
one small question. I have to leave in 15 minutes, but I think we have time for a small
question.
Okay,
one question. Just only one question.
Yes.
This was Shangita Haldar. Sir, can you tell me, please, what's the contrast between tragic hero and heroic tragedy? And also expound about catharsis. I'm glad to hear you, sir.
Okay, Sangita, your question is, you've asked two big questions. Tragic. I'll just give you tragic hero, just that, because the others I can't. There's no time, and catharsis is a whole. That's.
If you allow me to interrupt you in this regard. Okay, for Sangeeta, because I'm telling you, because you know about Sir's new book in a little bit. So Sir actually started one YouTube channel to cater literary help around the globe.
Yes.
For that, and Sir gives all the answers regarding these questions in the particular YouTube channel. So if you would like to know all these things, you could pay a visit to the YouTube channel. I will definitely give the link of this YouTube channel. You can get that, and you can ask your question in the comment box. I will give you answer.
Very good. Very good.
That I would like to know, sir, about the upcoming book. If you just tell the title of the book, Tragedy and Post-Colonial Literature.
Yes.
So, sir, if you tell us about this book.
Okay.
What's very special about it?
Actually, there are two things. One is that my audience, you should go to the YouTube channel. Gautam will give you the information. It's called Critic Reading Writing. Many of the themes of tragedy, and I'm still working them out because I have more episodes coming. I actually answer, if you watch the first two episodes just to start with, they'll give you a few ideas and so on. In fact, there will be an episode on Arundhati Roy's God a Small Thing, but that's coming later. It's not coming anytime soon. But if you look at some of the episodes, and by the way, just as a matter of principle, if you want to understand tragedy, you should be exposed or open to think about many different things from the perspective of philosophy, from the perspective of religion. Religious discourses have lots of discussions of tragedy, but you should also be prepared to read or listen, in this case to listen to books that you may never have heard of before or even read. It doesn't matter. The way I discuss the text in on the YouTube channel, I don't assume prior knowledge. So someone who has never heard of Agamemnon before, of Aeschylus, can listen to it and make sense of it. I when I was a young man, just before I went to university, I taught at a high school. It was overpopulated, and I taught a Form 1. These must have been 13-year-olds, and I taught Oliver Twist to a Form 1 class of 110 students in the same classroom. And we had among us all only 4 copies of the novel of Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist, 4 copies. And I had to teach 110 students with only 4 copies of the novel. So from that time, I mastered the art of talking about things that people know nothing about. It's a skill that I've mastered over a long period. So if you listen to it doesn't matter if you don't recognize what the thing is about. If you listen, you get something out of it, because I don't assume prior knowledge. So this is a pitch. Please, subscribe to the channel. Listen to it if you're really interested in tragedy. And as you listen, you get a sense of how your own questions fit into the discussion. And Gautam will give you more information about the channel.
Definitely, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And best of luck for your upcoming book and other books also. And we are really honored to have you for the first time in India on digital platform.
First time. You guys have a special place in my heart.
I'm really honored, sir, for you, because you have given me this opportunity to host you, and really I'm honored, sir. So, sir, I'm taking you off from the stream. Just be there.
One thing, please send me the introductory, that small film clip, the video.
So just be there in the studio. I'm taking you off, and I'm talking to you for 2 minutes, and I leave you, sir.
All right, wonderful.
So, participants, thank you very much for joining us in this insightful lecture, and we are really very happy, as well as very fortunate to have this kind of great literary academician. And we are going to have our next session on September 1st, 21st September, I have already mentioned. And in that session, we're going to host another very popular figure in literary world from Nottingham University of Malaysia. So please be there and join us on that day. And stay safe, stay protected. Good night, all.